CIM program, can we have a financial expert, someone who understands complex finance instruments, someone who can train to improve the modalities of implementing finance so that it's youth and women and everyone's at the table in terms of accessing these. So we were fortunate that Ramiro, Ortega, Landa answered that call and decided to provide his expertise working with CIMMYT. He has also shown extraordinary flexibility in terms of, I tasked him with this new area, understanding the finance instruments related to carbon markets, particularly the voluntary ones, as we'll hear today, are extremely unclear, variable. So part of this rapidly changing world is I'm trying to understand better how we can make voluntary carbon markets work for farmers, for smallholder communities, also for companies. They're part of this. We're about public-private sector development for sustainable intensification. So we need private sector there. And what is the perspective of government and society at large? We want to see carbon markets because this can support adaptation and mitigation, both. So carbon both mitigates, it reduces the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is very important, obviously, to reduce greenhouse gases, to reduce warming. But at the same time, obviously, as soil carbon increases, soil health increases. It's the foundation of soil health, which can then improve water infiltration, which helps you deal with erratic rainfall by both buffering erratic rainfall, reducing floods by improving infiltration, reducing erosion, all of these good things. But it takes time. So what better than a carbon market instrument to help a farmer get over some of the years where you transition from a degraded state into a more high carbon buffered state, so more resilient farming. So we're very interested in this in order as a practical way that farmers could actually adopt many of the practices that many of them want to, such as conservation agriculture. So we're going to hear more today on the pioneering ideas of Ramiro in terms of how we might understand and what are activities around voluntary carbon markets for all of these reasons. And I'm extremely pleased that Ramiro is going to lend us sort of an insight into these complex world. Thanks everyone again, and I'm going to turn it over to Ramiro and very much look forward to this presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind remarks, Dr. Sieg. Much appreciated. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming here today, and so much thank you for connecting from abroad. As Dr. Sieg was saying, our topic today is somewhat different than science and technology. We will look into carbon markets, and specifically on voluntary carbon markets. And that means analyzing what we call the market forces, supply, demand, and how it works, how this ecosystem, including regulations, how facilitate, or not often, that happens also, hamper the functioning of markets, how the market clears if they actually work well. So we are going to discuss what Sir Nicholas Stern of the London School of Economics called the result of the greatest market failure the world has ever seen. And he refers this to global warming. I'm having some problems here. What we are going to do is essentially covering a number of topics. Number one, we're going to see the context of these carbon markets. We are going to analyze what the main challenges of this market are. We're going to see in some detail voluntary markets in transition, because currently these markets are in a very challenging transition for the many situations I will refer to in more detail. We're going to discuss what opportunity to bring to the table a value proposition. And finally, we're going to see two business models for us to participate in these markets. So let me put, first of all, the context of the current situation and probably the mid-long-term impacts arising from this situation as a consequence of what we are now passing through. As Dr. Bram explained in a recent session we have the crisis framed by the 4 C's. Months after all these hostilities started, which brought costs of energy, food, generating this global inflation, recession, probably we're going to talk about stagnation, and at the very center of this, climate change. Of course, they are interrelated. We're not going to go into detail about how these interrelations actually work, but we are going to more focus on this climate change, which, as Nicholas Stern said, the greatest market failure of all time. So let me describe what's the current situation in terms of CO2 emissions. Up in the air and the atmosphere, we have something about 750,000 million, which is gigatons. That's up on the air. That's causing all the problems we are facing now in terms of droughts and all these huge rainfalls. In Pakistan, 40% of the territory was affected by this incredible situation. In 2021, total emissions, I'm not talking about net emissions, but total emissions, were about 36.2 gigatons. This year, we're going to close with 36.6. That means 1% above last year's, which means the record high ever. So we're not going well, absolutely, despite all this big talk on global fora and an outcry. We are continue supplying the atmosphere with CO2 and greenhouse gases at the global level. Now, we of course need resources to change the course of this situation. And that's something very interesting to look into. Agrifood systems generate 33% of the total emissions of CO2 gases. But we only receive 3% of the funding for this change, this transition to a more low carbon food systems situation. So that means that we only get 9.3 million, 2 times less than the energy and the transportation sector receive. We are doing very, very poor in terms of resource allocation, or if you want to put it in this way, we are not getting much access, which reflects the political economy of green finance, if you like. How much money you can get into your system to solve your current situations. We are 33% of the problem, but we are not getting resources enough for being part of the solution of this problem. So let me move on with this framework. So what options do we have? We desperately need funding for our transition, and we essentially have 2 options. Number 1 is continue our pledge for official green finance, That's local, international, bilateral, multilateral, so on and so forth. For this, we have these nationally determined contributions, which are essentially approved by government. When you look at the entire nationally determined contributions under which these resources are allocated, 70% of all these do not include any meaningful, any either policy statement or any clear policy resolution about providing funding for this. The other option is carbon markets. It's going to the private sector. Big discussion in COP27 has been funding. Well, there has been a breakthrough, but essentially based upon this damage and repair policy towards the nations facing natural disasters by this phenomenon, but not in terms of currently actually devoting resources to these sectors. I'll come back on this. So what option do we have? Of course, we're going to keep on pursuing funding from the official sources, but we also have the carbon markets. So the key question here is how we can become more competitive, if you like, we're talking about markets, to attract financial resources in order to, number one, reduce greenhouse gases emissions. Number two, increase this CO2 sequestration. And number three, improve the life standards of the small farmers. Now, this is a three-equation system which we have to solve somehow in order to become more competitive and in order to have access to private resources which are there. And we have to develop some product in order to compete this. Well, there's two carbon markets, actually. One is the compliance market, and the other one is the voluntary market. Compliance markets are government mandated, regulated, and highly controlled. The system is called a cap and trade program. And cap and trade works like this. I will give you an instance, just an example. Let's say in Germany, according to the nationally determined contributions, the government of Germany distributes allowances, which are permits for allowing these gas emissions, this CO2 emissions. And in this case, in our example, they allow 100,000 tons equivalent to Mercedes-Benz, and same for BMW in this example, okay? Now, at the end of the year, Mercedes-Benz emits 120,000 tons on the other side. So these guys actually can trade, which means that the more efficient, in this case, BMW, which is below the 100,000 ceiling, can trade with Mercedes, which is well above the margin limit, the ceiling of 100,000, but this time they can exchange my allowances for your excess, and the market then becomes more effectively reducing at the end of the day, because there's a cap which falls down, and there's a distribution which can be traded. Now, this is how the cap and trade programs work. The market value of these is $100 billion last year. The prices for this system for allowances is in the European Union, $72. In New Zealand, it's 88. In California, 29. Australia, 32. South Korea, 29. Huge distribution from 88 in New Zealand to 29 in South Korea. That's the way governments run, control, and manage these markets. Now, voluntary markets are non-regulated. They trade carbon offsets or credits, not allowances, and all is optional and voluntary. Sellers, on one hand of the equation, are project developers, and buyers are a company that wants to meet self-imposed carbon targets to reduce their emissions. This is all voluntary. This is completely private sector driven. And the market value of this last year was 1 billion. This year is expected to reach about 3 billion. So it's growing very fast and very quickly. So if we look at the prices, though, we find a great dispersion. Nature-based carbon credits are traded by $550. Tech-based, which are different types of technologies being adopted and implemented in various countries, and it's 1.46. Now, if you are running a business and in the European Union, you pay $72 per allowance, and New Zealand 88, and with some voluntary market, you can pay 146. What is your decision going to be? So we're talking about a very tricky product, because essentially is, number one, homogeneous. It should be pretty much the same, one equivalent ton in a promissory note. And we're talking about one intangible good or service, if you like. It's somewhere in between. But the prices make this very, very confusing. We are lacking the price discovery, which I will refer later. The IMF thinks that this considers that the average should be at least $75 per ton by 2030, if we are going to be serious about decreasing carbon emissions. But if you can buy for 150 the right to emit one ton, that's pretty much the shadow pricing. But that's not the same in Europe under these new regulations that they are adopting now. So there is this situation. Now, what is now the analysis on this voluntary carbon markets? Because it offers challenges as well as opportunities. It is a fractured market, which means that it's not a complete market. I mean, it's very isolated. There's places where you can trade, but essentially these are one-on-one bilateral over-the-counter transactions. These low prices reflects oversupply of these credits. Now, there are some Chinese bonds going on there at very low prices, which are bought by many very big corporations, and this is called greenwashing. So they claim they are carbon neutral, carbon friendly, carbon this, carbon that, but in actuality, they are buying at 150 the piece, so they can actually, quote unquote, offset their carbon emissions. That's not serious. That's not, should I say, ethical, at least. And they have generated much controversy because of the strong concerns in terms of the quality and integrity of these bonds, of these credits, of these offsets, as we call them. Now, last year at COP26, there was this tremendous enthusiastic response in terms of net zero pledges. Everyone wants to be net zero by the year 2050. 702 of the 2,000 largest corporations, global corporations, are pledged to this commitment, And this will drive a massive demand increase over the next year for this type of bonds. But they have to be high quality, high integrity. Otherwise, this is going to be very, very unstable and very counterproductive, in fact. For instance, Shell Oil announced it's going to buy about 120 million of this carbon market equivalent bonds by 2030. This volume exceeds the total market of 2019. Only one big company. So this is going to be a very, very explosive increase. And look at the demand and supply, because markets are essentially focused on this. Let me go back to the stock of 750 gigatons and emissions for this year in 36.6 gigatons. In order to comply Paris Agreement, which means keep the increase up to 1.5 centigrades, or at most 2, the estimated demands for these C credits or offsets is going to be between 7 and 13 gigatons per year. So this is pretty much the market demand for this. And the estimated supply is going to be between 8 and 12 every year until the year 2050, which is the big year. So in order to become credible, relevant, voluntary private markets should be providing high quality, high integrity credits at scale. What do we mean by this? There was a huge concern, especially in some global organizations, which essentially they said, okay, we have to really be serious about this, because we don't want actual greenwashing claims that are actually dropping this with credits, with papers, with bonds that doesn't mean exactly what they claim to be. So the strategy is creating definite goals, thresholds, and standards, and governance bodies to oversee, update, and upgrade this system. On the supply side, they will focus on high quality and integrity, science-based credit standards. And now they are proposing 10 carbon credit practices. Currently, we have 5. They are doubling down this to 10 in order to make very strong, credible credits. On the demand and on the demand side, they are now looking on who are the buyers at the market. The market is going to be strong enough, transparent enough, efficient enough to mobilize the liquidity we desperately need. We have seen the situation in terms of access to finance and access to financial resources, and we actually need these resources very badly. So the market will provide these resources provided we offer very strong, high credible offsets. These are the 10 supply side carbon credits markets. These are provided by the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets. There you go. I don't want to go into big detail about this, but essentially there has to be robust, independent, third-party validation and verification. And there has to be robust, science-based quantification of emission reductions and removals. Science-based. It's not something that, to my best estimation, no. This has to be science and technology working together to certify that there is a high hopefully 99.9 degree of credibility, of possibility, probability that this bond actually represents 1 ton equivalent of CO2, either reduced or removed, or both in this case. So these are the new rules for the supply side. For the demand side, it's another entity which is called the Voluntary Market Initiative, which describes 3 levels of segmentation for those companies wanted to purchase to access to these permits, gold, silver, and bronze. But these are only for companies on track to achieve emissions goal. This emissions goal should be publicly stated. And first of all, they have to make reductions through its value chain. And then to cover the remaining emissions, excess emissions, they can go and access to high quality carbon credits. And second, carbon neutral certification only for those companies, corporations, which are in full compliance of their own commitments, science-based, serious implementing programs to achieve net zero emissions. And this goes all the way across the scopes 1, 2, and 3. This is essentially how these gases are emitted and how can be offset. And there's a number, which is in the presentation, a number of prescriptions so that this carbon neutral tag could be used only if this is happening, because it's completely misleading and it's dishonest to claim to be carbon neutral when they are just purchasing $150 bond somewhere to do this. So what's happening now? I mean, these are proposals because this is an unregulated market. This is essentially a private market. Okay, these public consultations ended in late September this year at COP27. We all expected these new rules to be adopted. Didn't happen. It's interesting. Major stakeholders as VERA is a standards organization, gold standard, Carbon Plan, and others are saying, well, this may not work. From non-regulation to over-regulation, we're going to the other extreme of the equation. We have to really put some more degrees of freedom in order to suppliers and buyers to increase transactions if we want this market to succeed. So there will be another wave of additional consultations and feedback. And it's expected this to be the big thing in the next COP27. But by then, everything should be in place. Otherwise, it's going to be a new delay. In the meantime, some big corporations like Microsoft, Unilever, Hitachi Energy UK, Mahindra, which is a big consortium in India, are adopting and piloting these very rules and regulations. So this is where we are. We talk about markets, supply, demand, rules, regulation, transition. Where we are. Well, we could be this to the market. With science-based technology, direct technical assistance, and our farmer-centered approach, we can generate a high quality and integrity carbon credit as a financial tool, able to at once face 3 big food system challenges facing today. Number 1, we can increase sustainability by allowing carbon emitters to offset their emissions with high quality, high integrity credits. Number two, we could promote inclusiveness by implementing throughout this financial instrument revenue sharing models with farmers to pay for providing environmental services, which is decreasing emissions and increasing removals, improving their income. What is interesting about our model, our proposed model, is that we are, number one, or approach to agriculture, which essentially is regenerative agriculture. This allows for less use of inputs which are generating carbon emissions. And we increase removals by essentially absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere. So we have two deltas here. We have two deltas, one increasing absorptions and two decreasing emissions. Now, the third is we are going to support resilience at the farmer level. At COP27, there was a major outcry by the Africans that said, hey, guys, what about the small farmers? If there's someone who's really being threatened and is receiving all the problems of this big climate change, is small farmers, and especially in Africa. Well, they say, yeah, we're going to hear you, and this big outcry was postponed for the next COP, but the problem is there. The elephant is in the living room. This third proposition, which is part of our value, is going to the farmer level, supporting generating resiliences by increasing access to regenerative agriculture, for instance, and thus becoming more resilient to the climate change situation. So with this value proposition, with a strong science-based and technological approach we have, we can make this value proposition extremely efficient and competitive in the terms we described before. What we're doing, we are now kind of moving ahead of the curve. We have this carbon market India experience. It's a small program. We expect to capture between 4 tons to 5 tons and somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 hectares. Well, this is a very small. Actually, in India, everything is small. You know, it's a huge country with big challenges. But we, in association with Grow Indigo and the Indian Council of Agriculture, are implementing this pilot project since January 2001. These are focusing on producers of rice and wheat farms, which are monitored, geotagged, and using remote sensing for farming practices. So through this remote sensing, we can capture essentially the information needed for this. Now, what is interesting is that we expect to have a value of $15 per ton as compared to the average 5-6 in this voluntary market system. Why? Is because we are improving, we are enhancing our product, if you like, by including gender, water management, and biodiversity. So this is not going to be only for sequestering carbon or reducing emissions, but also improving the finance of the small farmer, gender situation, biodiversity, and water management. So this is called co-benefits. Can we do it? Of course, we're doing it now. We are now looking at what the objectives and activities are. So based upon this experience, we will scale up these activities in Mexico. We are already contacting people and consultants and stakeholders here to develop a Mexico initiative, and later on, most probably in Ethiopia. By the way, Vera and the African Carbon Association are pledging, with help of USA, which is very interesting. They want to increase CO2 agriculture-oriented projects by 19 times until the end of this decade in Africa. We are thinking about, we are considering, and think we will go ahead anyway, in Ethiopia with this activity, and we are now searching for new partners to develop this. So what do we mean by that? We want to have a very meaningful experience in terms of having these experiences in India, in Mexico, and Ethiopia, in order to have, number one, full validations of procedures to monitor carbon sequestrations at scale through sensing and soil sampling. So we're going to make the best estimator at the rational, cost-effective situation to really make a comparison and to compare and contrast these three experiences in order to set probably the best practices for policy action in this field. We are going to be a key player because we have a unique position as a science technological leader, an innovative broker with high international credibility. So this is pretty much what I want to share with you. And what's our two business models? Number one is offset. We have been discussing offset throughout this hour. And the other one is insets. And insets are working with the decarbonization of the value chain. This is not for generating carbon offsets, but rather to clean up, to work within the value chain of our partners, in this case, in order to remove those excess emissions. And actually, this is the real solution to the problem. So we have two areas of activity upcoming, which I think, of course, we are going to provide our big support for this new challenge. Last century challenge was essentially the food program, and we faced it, and we were very successful about it. Now, this is the big challenge: global warming, climate change, and how to solve it. Thank you very much. I covered, I think, most of what I wanted to say, and I really appreciate your comments or your questions, please.
I'm hoping that you can see the chat, or they can be read out to you, because there's some good questions in the chat. Thanks, first of all. We should give a round of applause. I'll give it virtually here because I think that was very clear and extremely helpful as we try to understand. I don't know about everyone else in the audience, but I've been in these complex conversations, and now I have a better understanding of what offsets, inserts, etc. mean. Thank you very, very much. I'll go ahead and read one of the chats. What is the current regulations in Mexico for carbon credits? What are the expectations for this in the following next few years? Thank you.
Oh, there is no specific regulations for these voluntary carbon markets. There is regulations for the official carbon policy. Recently, the Minister of Foreign Relations increased the commitments of Mexico from 28 to 35% diminishing. That was at COP 27. But this is only from the government managed programs regarding this. This is voluntary private markets are 100% private. So there's no regulations in Mexico and there's no regulations elsewhere. That's exactly why these new proposed benchmarks are being considered globally. Tech. Well, yeah, I only mentioned CO2 or CO2 equivalent, but essentially, this is the way we bunch up all the greenhouses gases. This includes methane, this includes CO2. We call it CO2 because it's the more frequent and the more common type of greenhouse gas. But by saying equivalent, we could be bundling another different types of gases under this name, if you like, which is CO2 equivalent.
So thanks for that very much, those comments, Tech. I wanted just to comment here too that, yes, we actually have a comparative advantage at CIMMYT looking at nitrous oxides. So the work of Yvonne and others, which is very pioneering on the fact that nitrous oxides are non-linear in terms of fertilizer management. That is, if you keep adding more fertilizer, a lot of the world's models, the carbon nitrogen models and climate change models more broadly, they considered as you add more fertilizer, you have excess, basically nitrogen, fixed nitrogen turns into nitrous oxides, but it turns out it's actually exponential. It's a hockey stick, just like carbon dioxide, unfortunately, has been lately. That is, once you get above about 100 kgs nitrogen for maize, so once you get above the nitrogen that's taken off in the crop, then suddenly nitrous oxides, instead of being linear when you add more fertilizer, they become exponentially higher. So another reason we need to mediate and support farmers in using moderate, judicious amounts of nitrogen. But the big challenge here, and this is what I wanted to get your feedback on, my question for you, Ramiro, is can this be part of carbon markets? Is it possible to monitor reductions in fertilizer use while still supporting high yields? Thank you.
Perhaps one very quick comment is that yes, we are working in terms of improving our quality measuring, both from the soil sampling perspective and from the satellite remote means of doing this. So we are in a very strong, unique position to actually come very strong in terms of credibility and integrity of what we can certify. That's what puts us in a very strong competitive position. There's a lot of science and great technology we are developing in here. And again, when we say there is a 1 ton CO2 emission equivalent here, we could be also bundling. It's not only CO2, but other green gases, greenhouse gases. There are gases which are 20 times more powerful, if you like, in terms of this greenhouse effect. Methane and other, which could be bundled in this one single certificate.
Very nice presentation. Can you hear me?
You. Yeah.
Okay.
Clear.
Good. What I would like to raise with you is the issue. You know, you're right. You know, we have a lot of science which can come into play in tracking, but monitoring emissions at a very granular level is very, very costly. It's relatively cheap to do it at a large scale. So keeping track of whether the emissions are going up or down in general, yes, no problem. But monitoring at the granular level, at the level of field, is extremely costly, because doing it through satellite imaging is not good enough at that granular level, which means that it's tricky, especially when you're talking about non-linear relationships, as Sieg pointed out. So it's not as much that where you can easily use proxies for the emissions through input use, and then and management practices, and then be able to identify, okay, yeah, that's more or less relates to a certain level of emissions mitigated, which can then be carbon credits can be given for that. So yeah, that's something that we really need to take into consideration. That in the implementation, there is a lot of these kind of technicalities which are going to be extremely tricky to do. And so, if and the danger is if you start implementing without taking that into account, it's going to lead to some early failures, and everybody turning away from the process, while throwing away the baby with the bathwater. So that's basically the caution I would like to give here.
Thank you very much for your comment, Gideon. Well, let me go back to the finance side of this equation, because we all know that it's not cheap. It's not inexpensive to actually conduct this type of research and certification. In India, $15 per equivalent ton, we can cover, and I think we're covering well enough. If prices are about 70 or 50 or 40, I'm sure we will have plenty of more resources to actually verify with a higher percentage of certainty of the quality and integrity of this carbon credit we're going to emit. So essentially, what comes next is, okay, we're going to do this, but what is going to be our expected price to cover this? We are talking with some Mexican guys interested in doing this here in Mexico. And of course, at the center of this any discussion is, are you going to buy over the counter this? You want to go and set it in by the way, there's two exchanges now, one in London and the other one in Dubai, who are very much looking forward trading these papers. So at the core, yeah, there's so many details still to be seen, and got us in the details, I prefer to say. But thank you very much for your comments, Peter. Well taken. Oh, Tech, please. You raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Ramiro. Thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. Thank you very much. And then it was very much needed to have a review and synthesis of what formal compliance market and informal markets are out there in order to promote so-called low emission technology that we are promoting. So basically, when you come to the value proposition for CIMMYT, I like that way, because we all understand that, the way that formal markets for the carbon are developed in a way that, you have to be bad guy in order to get a better benefit. And our farmers are not bad guy. They are already in a good direction. And by using the formal market techniques, if you have to avoid double accounting, then they cannot really compete with, those bad guys who are already in the higher side of the emission. So in your value proposition, are you saying that now our go ahead approach is to sell the carbon credit by using voluntary markets, not to the formal market? Or will there be possibility that we also propose formal market that, okay, look, if we just define market in this way, then those people who are not already emitting that much are not going to benefit, and then there has to be some system in order to benefit those people who are already lower side of the emission. And one is that, and another is the reason that I was bringing the issue of methane and nitrous oxide is we are talking about food system, and those are the major emissions that we have from the food system. Carbon dioxide is more of the industrial sector emission, which is not that much of our business, to say so. Did you have a chance to look at the possibility of promoting these technologies by using some other techniques like payment of ecosystem services or repurposing subsidies, government subsidies, or also responsible sourcing? Some of the work has been done on that ground as well. So we may need to think on that direction as well when we're talking about promoting those low emission technologies in a smallholder farming system. It's more of question as well as suggestion.
My dear friend, thank you very much for your comments and your question. Let me refer to the last question first. No, we didn't. We're still looking into ways to go about. We have to be kind of careful here, and we have to pick up good partners for doing this. Having said that, number one, there is at least 2 or 3 ways to trade these bonds. Number one is a direct cross over-the-counter way in which we have from the get-go a buyer, and we agreed upon the final price, which is going to be convenient for both parties. Very often, this buyer provides financing for developing the entire product, all the way from the concept through the different stages of the project, which I didn't go in detail. A second alternative is saying, okay, we have this bottom price, and we are going to share whatever the market price is over this bottom. Let's say we agreed on $50 per ton, and if the price out there is $80, we're going to split the difference. This $30 so we can get $15 more, and the buyer will save or will benefit from paying $15 less. So there's a number of very important, very interesting alternatives we have to explore. The other way is just going ahead ourselves, get the carbon credits, and sell them through the market at large. There's a lot of buying and selling there. This could be a little bit risky because we don't know exactly how the prices out there will be in a year from now, let's say. So there's different ways of looking into this, and these are strategic decisions we have to take and consider on case-by-case basis. But anyway, we have this under our radar, on our radar, and we're considering different types of alternatives, which on due time I will bring to the table. Thank you very much.
questions in the chat box. We are going to keep them and we are going to share with you so you can continue with the discussion with our participants. Dr. Sig had to leave because she has a commitment with
Sure.
farmers at the hub in Chiapas. But thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, Ramiro. So our colleagues will be happy to continue discussion with you directly. You are at home at our headquarters, so we can get in touch with you. Thank you very much. Have
Thank
a
you.
nice.
Thank you very much for all your great support on this, Isabel, and your team.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. Y ahora champaña, por favor.